How's it going, y'all? Today I want to share with you how From Software restored my humanity. I do realize that this is a story that has been told by multiple creators over the years, but I do want to share my personal experience and my journey from day one of first coming across these games and giving it up 2 days later, all the way through to becoming a full-time content creator that focuses primarily on Soulsborne and From Software games. So to give you all a little bit of background on my experience with these games, I started watching Bloodborne videos about 7 or 8 years ago. Just boss fights, highlights, playthroughs, things like that. I knew that I really enjoyed that game, but I didn't realize the connection between all of the different Souls games at the time. So after watching Bloodborne videos for so long, I finally got to the point where I felt like it was a game that I would want to play. And this is coming from years of pretty much only playing Call of Duty, Battle Royale, multiplayer, zombies, and just didn't have much interest in other games outside of that at the time. So obviously I realized that Bloodborne is a PlayStation exclusive. Next best thing that I was able to find was Dark Souls 3. Started it, tried it, gave it a couple days, and just couldn't get through even to Vort, you know, the first kind of like main boss after Gundyr. So it was tough, and I didn't have any friends or people at the time that were into those games or familiar with those games. And so after those couple days of trying and failing, I just gave up and I shelved it.
The fire fades, and the lords go without thrones.
When I started that first playthrough of Dark Souls 3, I definitely had quite a lot of things going on in real life that were adding a lot of extra mental and emotional weight, certainly carried into that playthrough and that experience, and that was why I felt I couldn't continue on and keep persevering through that experience. It was all very fresh things that were happening, and so I do look back at that time and think about that, and you know, flash forward now, it's a much different experience. I now realize that by seeking challenge, yes, there is going to be failure along the way, but at the very least, I am always going to walk away learning something. And so when it comes to dealing with some of those kind of real life struggles and challenges, I tend to be a bit more open to navigating those now and bringing additional challenges and obstacles along the way.
A process that cannot be understood by stopping it. We must move with the flow of the process. We must join it. We must flow with it.
So flash forward to early 2021, I was in the middle of processing just a ton of different life events that had kind of gone on over the previous few years, between getting let go a couple times to being cheated on, losing people, just sort of things like that. And I was trying to really observe what things drove me as a human being and what things I felt that I could contribute. And being in this place was really great for me, because before that I was just totally shut down from the world and from living and thriving, really. Like I just was a shell of a person. So being in a place where I really wanted to find something and build something for me was a very empowering place to be. And I think being in that headspace really had a major influence on me being able to go into that next playthrough, like really feeling not necessarily ready, but that it was possible. So with all that being said, I was very excited about the concept of Elden Ring and the open world design, you know, just kind of taking that Dark Souls and From Software formula and making it a bit more cushioned. And so I went into that experience like ready to take on the challenge and ready to, you know, get to the end no matter what it took. And so that included, you know, times where, like right outside the capital, I just straight up went behind that sentinel and gassed him to death. And there's other times like that, you know, with like sleep pots for the Godskin duo and things of that nature that I had to look elsewhere and find solutions from others to make it through that game. And honestly, if it wasn't for that experience, I don't know if I would have gotten to be as close to the community as I, you know, am now. There's something that I didn't really take into account with my first attempt in Dark Souls 3 that I did with Elden Ring, and that was that other people had gone through this experience, and other people were also struggling and dealing with the same challenges that I was. And so being in a place where I was open to seeking solutions from others totally changed the whole experience for me. You know, I was able to go in with like, this is possible. It's just a matter of time and patience and finding the right, you know, the right path. Whereas with Dark Souls 3, it was truly like this impossible task because I just was not in that same headspace of others are also going through this, and I just need to look for, you know, solutions outside of me. And yeah, that totally changed the whole dynamic. Just as a reminder. Now, don't get me wrong, just because there was this openness to the challenge and seeking solutions to the challenge doesn't mean that there wasn't any frustration or rage moments or anything like that. There were definitely times where, you know, for Fire Giant, for example, I had to take a couple days to just not play the game and come back fresh to, you know, re-engage with that fight. And there was a lot of moments throughout that playthrough that were really, really tough mentally to get through. But between knowing that I wasn't the only one going through it and that it was possible to get to the other side, like I kept coming back. I kept showing back up, and I kept wanting to re-engage with those fights. One of the things I really admire about these games is their way of drawing you into a challenging experience and making you want to continue to come back to that experience. That's just not something that I've really come to know with life. Generally, if it's something that I don't feel confident in or don't have experience or skills in, I will usually stay away from those types of things. And this is something that I can recognize the process, you know, going into those boss fights and coming out the other side and seeing that does also have a really big impact and effect. And it can be something that is kind of looked at as like a muscle memory, you know, and the more that you do it and the more that you practice that and go through those challenges, the more likely you will continue to do that and do it in different areas. And I think that that's a really big piece to these games that is really up to you, whether you continue to engage or not. And with other games, there tends to be a bit of backseating and kind of taking from that experience of this is up to you. Leaving it entirely up to the player really makes the experience that much more satisfying to get through. You know, once you get to the end, you know that it was you that took those steps in that time and had that patience to make it to the end. And with other games, you know, Ragnarok is the first one that comes to mind, like telling you what you need to be doing, even though it may not necessarily be boss fights, just takes away from that experience of figuring things out and, you know, putting the puzzle pieces together yourself. And don't get me wrong, that formula doesn't always work. I do realize that there's certainly players that don't want to deal with a game that's that cryptic and having to, claw and dig just to get basic information. But I do think that it's very important that games give players that option. Being able to, look up guides and walkthroughs and get all of those details and context, but you also have the option of figuring it out on your own and going through that process and absorbing that information as you go. One of my favorite parts about these games is their ability to provide the freedom of failure. And that is something that I don't think many of us are able to openly experience without that fear of some sort of consequence, right? The world is always moving, it's constantly changing. Everybody has their own schedules and agendas and this or that. And it can be really, really difficult to be able to have a place to experiment and figure out what works and doesn't work without it being tied to some sort of timeline or some sort of outside influence. And I think we see it a lot in the gaming industry with, dev teams being forced to release games that aren't ready. I know this is an active conversation right now with Cyberpunk 2077. And how now we are 2 years later and the game is finally in a state where the development team probably wanted it to be 2 years ago.
Fear's the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings obliteration. And I'll face my fear, no permit to pass over me and through me.
Now, with that freedom of failure comes being open to it. And a lot of people, I think, go into these games initially thinking that it's going to go a particular way. And when the game fights back and doesn't allow that, I think a lot of people choose to move on and not look at the games again. And that was where I was at with Dark Souls 3 quite a few years ago. And it wasn't until I had sort of a big life shift and was in a different mental place before I was ready to dive into that game once again. Experiencing Elden Ring was truly a really big turning point for me. The experience that I had in that game, overcoming something that initially I felt was going to be impossible to get through, coming out the other side, was something that really motivated me in a lot of different ways in real life. And if it wasn't for my experience in Elden Ring and getting through to the end, I don't know if I ever would have really considered streaming and content creation and getting into these games the way that I have over this last year plus. I really think that without that experience and without that overcoming of that challenge, that I'd probably be in a very similar place to where I was before that. So flash forward 6 or 7 months, I actually decided to dive into Dark Souls 3 on stream. For those that don't know, I do stream over on Twitch, same name, Totally Retro Tech. But we dove in, and just as I anticipated, it was another brutal experience with some insane bosses and fights, and I absolutely loved it. I think Sister Freed took a good 3 or 4 streams. Nameless King 3 or 4 streams. It was a long playthrough, and I enjoyed every single bit of it. It wasn't really until my first playthrough of Sekiro that I started to think to myself, how can I take this first playthrough experience and get as close to recreating it as I possibly can? And that's just purely out of loving my experiences so far in these games and never wanting that to go away. So that was when I started to dive a bit deeper into challenge runs and that side of the community. And really, it's one of, if not my favorite piece to the FromSoft world and universe, is the community itself. I've met so many amazing people, so many inspiring people over the last year plus that I can directly tie where I'm at to knowing some of those people. And everybody is just so incredibly supportive. Whether you're doing a blood level 4 run in Bloodborne, or you're doing a fist only in Dark Souls 3, or a no-hit in Sekiro, like there's so many different avenues and so many ways to replay these games and re-experience that overcoming of a challenge feeling. And to see all the ways that people come up with is one of my favorite things. And of course, just like any community, there's always going to be some bad apples here and there. But one of the really awesome things that I love so much too is the kind of mutual respect that there is throughout the community for people to be able to enjoy those experiences and those playthroughs and those journeys. Every so often, we'll have people come into chat that just spoil and tell you exactly what to do and don't leave any of it for you to figure out and solve. And I think that just is honestly, it's really sad, because it takes away from that person being able to have that experience for themselves. And it's just another form of gatekeeping that experience. But overall, 99.9% of my experience over this last year has been people wanting me to thoroughly enjoy myself with these playthroughs and with my experience. And that has been such a massive motivator for me as a creator to continuously improve and continuously learn as much as I can about these games and how they impact people throughout our community. To be able to create a space or an experience for people where not only do you want to overcome the challenge that's before you, but once you have overcome that challenge, you want to seek more efficient, more improved ways that you can do it again, is once again something that just so many people don't experience at all, or at least as often as they should. Now, you also have the flip side of that, of if you make it more challenging and it becomes more challenging and it takes longer to get through, that there's also the mental and emotional weight that's tied to that. Now, for example, I late last year was going through Sekiro and got to Isshin, and that first phase I felt that I needed to perfect in order to get through to the second phase and have enough heals to last me the fight. And it got to a point where I was humiliated enough by that boss that I decided I was going to make it harder, and I wanted to go through that fight hitless in my first playthrough, just because it was frustrating me, and the the idea of being able to learn that fight without taking a hit the first time that I go through that fight was something that I put on myself. And with that, in my journey to get to the other side of that fight, there were definitely points where I kind of got a bit toxic with myself, where I was beating myself up and thinking that I couldn't do it, and that, you know, everybody else around me is better, and just, you know, totally tearing myself down. But I did eventually get through that fight, and it was one of the most satisfying and beneficial experiences that I think I've ever gone through, because it was that tough mentally and emotionally, and as a player to go through that, because whether you have the space and the freedom to fail, it doesn't take away the fact that failing sucks, and you don't want to. Like, you are going in with the attempt of not failing. So to sort of wrap things up, I am super grateful to this community and all of the people that I've met over this last year plus. I do have a couple huge shout outs. One goes to Gravy Robber, gifted me a PlayStation 5 earlier this year. If it wasn't for that, I definitely would still have not had the chance to experience Bloodborne, which is my #1 game of all time. And also a huge shout out goes to Spongelet on Twitch. If it wasn't for him, the idea of doing Bloodborne 60 FPS or Bloodborne Randomizer would just totally not exist. He donated a PlayStation 4 to the channel. So just a ton of insanely kind and supportive humans throughout this community. If it wasn't for the community, I definitely would not have considered diving in as much as I have over this last year into these games. So I appreciate you all a ton. If you are not subbed, feel free to drop a sub, drop a like. Let me know in the comments what your #1 From Software game is. I'd love to hear. And I will catch you guys in the next one.